Well, I thank the Chair for the recognition. Mr. Malkin, your story is nothing short of fascinating. As I mentioned, I do an energy efficiency summit in my district, and I've done that every year since my wife and I built a new house. And I wanted to put solar panels on, but the technology wasn't there. They're terribly expensive. And my wife, who's the architect, said maybe we could just do this with off-the-shelf efficiency technologies, foam insulation, the efficient attic system that's so important in a Texas summer, the high-efficiency air conditioners. So I guess my question is, you mentioned you can do what 40,000 households, with the equivalent of 40,000 households, but we also have a lot of power out there in those households, and while not everyone is going to build a new house, there are off-the-shelf retrofits that can be done on the existing housing stock. And every summer when we do this efficiency summit, I'm impressed by the local builders who show up and talk about the things that can be done, the energy audit, find the places in your home where the energy is not being utilized appropriately. Presumably you've done that with your building in New York, is that correct?
I've done it with my building in New York, and I've done it with my home. And the interesting thing is that the paybacks in my home really, to do the comparable work, because of the systems involved and the fact it's an existing home, happens to be about 100 years old, far, far longer than with commercial. My emphasis is go to where the money is. And the money right now, the low-hanging fruit, is concentrated in buildings, big buildings, hospitals, office buildings, retail facilities. I don't mean to say forget about homes altogether, but I do mean to say I think it's misdirected to focus on Homestar when BuildStar or other things which address the commercial real estate industry could have a much more immediate, very near-term effect on our total energy demand and can free up power and sources of power for other uses. And I would emphasize, by the way, I would not want to bog this down with too much data, but the folks at Johnson Controls and Jones Lang LaSalle are readily available to testify at any time, and they've got all the data on this.
I hope we will call them. Yeah. Can you mentioned 67 things to do for energy efficiency in the Empire State Building. You concentrated on 8. Can you give us, in the interest of time, the top 2?
I think the two most interesting things that we have done, one is we are taking 6,514 windows, which are thermopane and duopane installed 12 to 15 years ago, out of the building to a facility in the building, 5,000 square feet, where we take them apart, clean them, put in a Mylar sheet, reseal them with krypton argon gas. We take their energy efficiency from an R2, energy resistance to transfer of energy, from an R2 to an R8. We reuse 96% of the components, the frames, the glass. We reinstall them the next night in another floor. Through that process, we are greatly reducing the heat and cool transfer and reducing our load. The second thing, which I think is very interesting, is we have a DDC system which is 100%, 24/7, 365 days a year, operating every variable air volume damper, every fan, every pump, every radiator. It's all linked. So we're not only curing the #1 complaint in an office building, too hot, too cold, but we're fine-tuning the building so that it runs at peak efficiency, and if it ever slips out of commissioning, you know it immediately, as opposed to every 5 years when you check.
I'm anxious to hear about the other 6, but in the interest of time, I do need to ask Dr. Greenstone on the, of course, we passed a cap and trade, or they passed a cap and trade bill in the House. I guess I should say that was an absolutely dreadful bill. But when Al Gore came and talked to our Energy and Commerce Committee, and he did this twice, he talked about maybe it was time for a new paradigm and we get rid of the income tax and the payroll tax and just have a carbon tax or an energy tax. Have you looked into that at all? Replacing our existing tax codes with just purely an energy tax.
Congressman Burgess, I have not looked into replacing income tax with a carbon tax. I think what is probably worth highlighting, though, is it is possible to design a carbon tax, or we could call it a cap and trade system, where the costs are minimized to American families. And
it may be possible, I'm going to interrupt you, it may be possible we didn't do it in that bill. Let me just ask you this, because you mentioned about X prizes or national prizes. H.R. 5505 is an X prize for dealing with nuclear waste. Now, we want Mr. Malkin to have his Tesla charged with non-carbon electricity generating, and it just seems like nuclear power would be the way to go. any interest in us pursuing something like that?
I think it's important to pursue research and development into nuclear energy. It's got to be at the top of the list.
I'd appreciate you looking at HR 5505 and giving me feedback on what you think.
I'd be happy to.
Mr. Snyder?